The city moved around me like a restless tide, tall buildings reflecting sunlight that felt almost accusatory, as if each glass pane knew what had happened and judged me for it. Driving past downtown, I let my hands rest lightly on the wheel, my mind replaying the last 6 months of chaos. The protests, the arrests, the humiliation, and the slow, dizzying awareness that everything I thought I could control had been a fragile illusion. I had been passionate once, fueled by outrage and hope in equal measure. My activism had been my identity, my armor, and my lifeline. But the arrest, the public shaming, and the night behind bars had cracked something open inside me. The city felt larger now, each sound sharper, each movement more pronounced. Survival had stripped away the superficial, leaving only clarity. Every moment carried weight, and every glance revealed possibility. That's when I saw them. Ethan, tall and meticulously dressed, his posture rigid as if every inch of him had been designed for perception rather than comfort. And Sierra, his colleague, whose presence radiated ambition, glamour, and impatience. They were arguing right on the sidewalk, the afternoon crowd parting unconsciously around them. It wasn't subtle. Every gesture, every inflection, screamed conflict. I slowed, my foot resting lightly on the brake, and watched. My heart didn't race, not in the way it had when I had been naive about him before. There was no longing, no hope, only observation. It was almost clinical, the way my mind catalogued the scene, the sharp angles of Sierra's face as she shouted, the way Ethan's hands rose in a defensive gesture, the tension in his jaw. He wasn't defending anyone but himself. I remembered the countless moments when I had thought we were partners, sharing a vision, a purpose. Every rally I attended, every article about environmental reform, every media interview had been co-opted by him to build an image, a convenient alignment with the activist Harper, the girl who made him seem progressive, ethical, engaged. But that image had never been real. And now, here it was, exposed in the harsh light of the city streets. I pulled over a block away, keeping the engine running, my hands still calm on the wheel. Watching him now, I realized the depth of my own naivety. The arrest had been a crucible. The humiliation had stripped me raw. And yet, as I observed him falter under the intensity of Sierra's accusation, I felt not sorrow, not anger, but a strange, liberating clarity. I didn't need him. I never had. The quiet of the car contrasted sharply with the escalating voices outside. I had once feared confrontation, once imagined that uncovering betrayal would unravel me. But this was different. I had survived the worst of public scrutiny. I had endured imprisonment and societal judgment for standing by my principles. And now, betrayal was just another moment to navigate, another fact to integrate into the story of my life, without letting it define me. As Sierra's words rang out, accusing, impatient, demanding, I felt a subtle thrill. The stakes were no longer mine alone. They belonged to him. Every calculated pause, every dismissive gesture, was evidence of his priorities, and none of them included me. And for the first time, I didn't need to plead, to explain, to defend. I simply watched. I took a deep breath, the air heavy with city dust and sunlight, and made a quiet decision. This observation was not passive. It was preparation. I would respond, not in rash emotion, not in reactive anger, but with deliberate, precise action. The arrest, the humiliation, the betrayal, all of it had been a trial by fire. And I had emerged intact, sharper, fully awake. For the first time in months, I felt an exhilarating sense of control. The world had tested me, stripped away illusions, and left only clarity. And as I watched Ethan stumble under the weight of his duplicity, I knew this was the moment where my rebirth truly began, not just as an activist, but as a woman fully in command of her life, capable of wielding truth, ethics, and strategic action like armor. The quiet observation was over. It was time to act. I stayed a block away, engine idling, hands gripping the wheel lightly but firmly, my eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. The afternoon sun reflected off the glass facade of Ethan's high-rise, casting distorted reflections of a man I had once believed I knew. But now, the image was cracked, fractured, impossible to mistake. Sierra's voice cut sharply through the hum of the city. I'm sick of waiting for you to end it with the activist. We are the power couple, Ethan, not you and that naive, arrested girl. The words were a blade, precise and clean. My heart didn't lurch. They no longer had the power to do that, but my mind clicked into place, cataloging, analyzing, integrating. Every instinct honed through protests, arrests, and countless confrontations rose to the surface. He had never loved me. He had never even tried. Every carefully crafted media appearance, every interview featuring my activist profile, every smile he'd flashed in public had been a calculated maneuver to elevate his own image. Ethan's response was deliberate, smooth, rehearsed even under pressure. Be quiet. She's useful for my profile. We'll announce our engagement once the merger closes. Just wait. The words hit me differently than I expected. There was no heartbreak here, no disbelief. There was clarity. Every betrayal, every slight, every compromise of my own ethics for him now made sense in a harsh, illuminating light. I understood the full scope of his manipulation. I hadn't been a partner, a lover, or a comrade. I had been a tool, a stepping stone, a prop. I remembered the jail cell, the night of arrest, the cold metal bars pressing against my back, and the overwhelming sense of public humiliation. I had thought that was the worst of my trials. But this, watching the man I had trusted use me so flagrantly, was a different kind of reckoning. It was personal, political, and entirely unavoidable. Yet, paradoxically, it felt freeing. Freedom didn't come with naive forgiveness. Freedom came with recognition, with action, with the ability to see clearly and respond deliberately. And I knew exactly what needed to happen next. I reached for my phone, hands steady, no tremor in my fingers. Finn's name appeared on the screen. He had always been a quiet, grounding presence, standing at the edge of Ethan's schemes with an unspoken disapproval that was more powerful than any argument or confrontation I could have mustered. He had seen Ethan for what he was long before I had, and his moral compass had never wavered. I didn't pause. I didn't second-guess. I called. Finn. My voice was calm, deliberate, but not without weight. I need you.
He's using me.
All of it. His profile, his image, it's a lie. And the merger, it's about to cement his facade. I need your help. There was a brief silence on the line, the kind that carried a storm of understanding. And then, finally, I'm on my way. Even as I ended the call, my mind was racing. The merger, the media optics, the fallout, everything had to be handled strategically. This wasn't just about exposing Ethan. It was about reclaiming my agency, about transforming betrayal into power. I had survived incarceration and public humiliation. I could survive this with precision and strategy. I took a deep breath, letting the city's noise wash over me without letting it penetrate the clarity of my thoughts. I didn't need revenge in the petty, impulsive sense. I didn't need to yell, to cry, to make a scene. I needed action. Strategic, ethical, and effective action. I needed the kind of response that reflected everything I had endured and learned. The nights behind bars, the shame, the exposure, and the lessons that had carved strength into my bones. As I watched Ethan and Sierra finally part ways, tension still lingering in every rigid line of their bodies, I felt a strange exhilaration. The betrayal was complete, undeniable, and entirely his to manage. My role was no longer participation, it was orchestration. Finn would arrive soon. Together, we would navigate the fallout, reclaim my story, and ensure that the truth emerged with clarity and impact. The storm of arrest, public humiliation, and betrayal had not broken me. It had forged me. I was ready to step out of the shadows of his manipulation and into a life where honesty, strategy, and ethical alignment guided every move. I started the car, engine humming with intent, and drove toward the path where action, rather than observation, would define the narrative. This was no longer just survival. This was rebirth. Finn arrived just as the city's late afternoon glow softened into early evening. He didn't knock, didn't hesitate. He simply appeared, as if he had always been part of the scene, a grounding presence in the chaos of my newly unspooling reality. There was no need for words at first. His expression, quiet and concerned, said everything. He had seen this coming, and he had already decided he was on my side. I took a deep breath, the weight of betrayal pressing against the armor of clarity I had been building since the arrest. There had been panic before, isolation, shame. But now, the emotional storm had passed. What remained was strategy. Every movement, every word, every revelation had to be deliberate. We weren't acting out of vengeance. We were reclaiming truth, ethics, and agency. I saw them, I said quietly as Finn settled beside me, his eyes scanning the scene like a second set of instincts. Ethan and Sierra. The conversation, it confirmed everything. He's using me, and it's public. He's co-opting my activism to boost his corporate image, and he doesn't even see me as a person in it. Not really. Finn nodded, the set of his jaw tight with restrained anger, his loyalty clear. I know. I've always known, Harper. And now we make sure it doesn't stick. He can't hide behind the merger or the media narrative. Not this time. There was a clarity in his words that bolstered my own. I realized as I listened that the arrest, the humiliation, the isolation, all of it had been preparation. I had survived when others would have crumbled, and that survival wasn't just physical or public. It had been moral, ethical, and intellectual. And now it would be applied. We mapped it out in quiet deliberation. First, exposure had to be factual, unassailable, tied to evidence rather than emotion. Public perception could be guided, but only if the narrative was coherent, undeniable, and precise. Finn had a network, connections in journalism and corporate circles who valued integrity over influence. With his guidance, we could craft a disclosure that both reclaimed my story and undermined Ethan's carefully constructed facade. Even as we planned, I felt a strange exhilaration, not vindictive, not reactive, but the calm thrill of agency. The arrest had been humiliating, yes, but it had also been transformative. I was no longer a reactive participant in someone else's life or image. I was the architect of my own narrative. Every decision Finn and I made reflected that principle: honesty, clarity, and ethical precision. I remembered the cold, hard metal of the jail cell, the humiliation in headlines and social media posts, and I realized something profound. The public scrutiny that had once felt like chains was now a tool, a lever for justice and truth. Every interview, every article, every factual disclosure we released would not be about revenge. It would be about transparency, integrity, and reclaiming the narrative that Ethan had tried to manipulate. Finn's presence was a stabilizing force. He wasn't just an ally in strategy, he was a moral compass. His calm, unwavering sense of right and wrong reminded me that my actions didn't have to be reactive or angry to be effective. The storm of betrayal had taught me the value of measured response. Now, guided by Finn's judgment and my own clarity, I could ensure that every move we made served a higher purpose. As evening deepened into night, we finalized the first steps. A carefully worded public statement, time to reach the right circles before the merger announcement. Evidence corroborating Ethan's manipulation, presented factually, without emotional flourish. And a strategy for media follow-up that maintained the focus on integrity, ethics, and the activist mission I had worked so hard to advance. When Finn finally leaned back, we shared a brief, silent acknowledgement. There was no celebration, no relief, just recognition of what had been accomplished and what lay ahead. I felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time in months, maybe years, I knew I was not just surviving. I was asserting my agency, reclaiming my life, and reshaping my story on my own terms. Driving home later that night, I watched the city lights ripple across the water, reflecting the solidity and depth of my own resolve. Betrayal had been the crucible, humiliation the fire, and the arrest the storm. But now, I was standing fully formed, deliberate, unshakable. The path ahead was still complex, still risky, but it was mine to navigate. And for the first time, I knew I would emerge not just intact, but victorious in the only way that mattered, with integrity intact, my ethics unbroken, and my autonomy absolute. The morning light spilled through my apartment window, sharp and unflinching, as if the city itself had decided to illuminate every detail of what was about to happen. I felt no hesitation, no fear. The arrest, the humiliation, the betrayal, they had all led to this moment. Every heartbeat in my chest was steady, deliberate, a reminder that I was no longer the frightened, reactive version of myself. Finn arrived early, calm and composed, a quiet anchor amid the storm I had lived through. We had rehearsed every word, every step, every detail of the disclosure. It was not about vengeance, it was about truth. Ethical, indisputable truth, delivered with precision. The narrative we would present would leave no room for manipulation, no way for Ethan to maintain the polished facade he had spent months cultivating. As I sat in front of the camera, the city hummed faintly audible in the background, I felt a strange thrill. Not fear, not shame. Power. Not the power of domination or cruelty, but the quiet, deliberate authority that came from reclaiming one's story, reclaiming one's agency. For so long, my activism had been my voice, my shield, my identity. But now, in this moment, it was also my sword. The first words left my lips with clarity and purpose. I spoke of my activism, my mission, and the principles I had fought for, not to attack anyone personally, but to affirm the values that mattered most. Then, carefully, I outlined the truth of Ethan's duplicity, how my public persona had been co-opted to advance a corporate image, how trust had been manipulated, and how the facade of a partnership had masked opportunism and deceit. Each statement was deliberate, factual, and grounded in evidence. There was no room for emotional embellishment, no cries for sympathy. Just clarity, transparency, and moral authority. I felt the familiar weight of scrutiny, the shadows of past headlines and public judgment, but this time it didn't crush me. Instead, it strengthened me, like the wind that once threatened to tip me over now filling my sails. After the recording ended, Finn and I reviewed the dissemination plan. Social media posts, press releases, and careful coordination with journalists who valued integrity over influence, each piece meticulously designed to ensure the truth landed with maximum impact. Ethan's merger, his carefully curated image, would face a reckoning before it could be sealed. And I would emerge not as the girl used for optics, but as a woman fully in control of her own story. As the news began to ripple outward, the first reactions reached us. Whispers of disbelief, the subtle crackle of gossip, and the faint tremor in Ethan's network became visible patterns in the media landscape. He had spent so long cultivating perception, so long managing appearances, and now, every calculated angle was unraveling. I felt no glee, no satisfaction rooted in malice, only a steady, deep acknowledgement that truth, integrity, and deliberate action held power that deceit could never match. That evening, I walked along the river, the city lights reflecting like fragments of possibility across the water. The weight I had carried for months, the humiliation, the arrests, the betrayal, had shifted. It was no longer an anchor. It was a reminder of resilience, a testament to the power of endurance and strategic clarity. And beneath the surface of this realization, I felt another layer of awakening, the recognition that life could be guided not by fear, by manipulation, or by dependence, but by conscious, deliberate choice. Finn stayed close, not intrusive, but present, a subtle force of ethical alignment. Our conversations had begun to evolve beyond strategy, shifting toward reflection, values, and shared vision. For the first time, I noticed something deeper, a resonance, a connection rooted not in superficial attraction or circumstance, but in alignment of purpose and integrity. I had survived betrayal and humiliation. I had reclaimed my agency. And now, alongside someone I could trust fully, I glimpsed the possibility of something profoundly honest and enduring. Ethan's public image continued to falter, each misstep amplified by the transparency we had introduced. But I no longer felt the desire to watch him crumble. My focus had shifted entirely to what lay ahead, a life I controlled, partnerships grounded in truth, and the freedom to act without compromise. The storm of public scrutiny had refined me, stripping away illusions, leaving only the clarity of purpose and ethical authority. As night settled over the city, I felt the quiet thrill of rebirth settle into my bones. The arrest, the humiliation, the betrayal, all of it had been crucible and catalyst. I was no longer defined by manipulation or deceit, no longer tethered to someone else's ambition. I was Harper, fully present, fully aware, and fully alive. And in the shadows beside me, Finn walked with equal steadiness, a reminder that truth, alignment, and trust could guide not only strategy, but the possibility of connection that was real, enduring, and profoundly liberating. The days after the public disclosure passed in a blur of clarity and purpose. I moved through the city with a renewed sense of intention, each decision deliberate, each interaction weighed not by fear or obligation, but by principle. The storm of betrayal, humiliation, and public scrutiny that had once threatened to consume me now felt like a distant memory, a necessary crucible that had forged the woman I had become. Finn remained a steady presence at my side, a quiet but unyielding force of moral alignment. He did not instruct, did not overstep. He simply offered perspective, insight, and the rare gift of unshakable ethical consistency. I began to realize that our partnership was evolving beyond strategic collaboration. It was grounded in shared values, a mutual understanding of what mattered most, and an unspoken recognition that integrity could be the foundation for more than just professional strategy. Ethan's world, in contrast, was unraveling with alarming rapidity. The careful constructions he had built to project influence, charm, and ethical alignment were cracking under the weight of evidence. Every misstep, every late reply, every whisper of doubt in his corporate circles amplified the damage we had begun to sow. I felt no satisfaction in watching him falter. My focus had shifted entirely to the life I was building, to the reclamation of autonomy, purpose, and moral authority. Walking the city streets with Finn became a daily ritual, a quiet affirmation that life could be navigated with both clarity and connection. We discussed principles, strategy, and ethics with an intensity that was invigorating but not exhausting. And slowly, subtly, a new dimension emerged between us, one that was not forced or orchestrated, but natural. I began to notice the warmth of his gaze lingering a fraction longer than necessary, the gentle inflections in his voice that carried concern and care without intrusion. It was startling at first to recognize that I could feel attraction without losing myself. With Ethan, desire had always been entangled with fear, obligation, and compromise. With Finn, it was aligned with clarity, mutual respect, and shared values. I was beginning to understand that attraction did not require compromise of self, that connection could coexist with autonomy, integrity, and ethical purpose. One evening, we walked along the river under the soft glow of streetlights, the reflection of the city rippling across the water like scattered pieces of possibility. Conversation turned from strategy to reflection, from ethics to life experience. Finn listened with an attentiveness that was disarming, not invasive. And in his presence, I felt a quiet exhilaration, the recognition that honesty, alignment, and mutual trust could be the foundation not only for strategy, but for companionship, for connection that did not erode the self. The weight of the past, of betrayal and manipulation, felt increasingly distant. The arrest, the public shaming, the humiliation, they had all been crucibles, shaping me into a woman capable of navigating deception, exposure, and ethical complexity without losing composure or purpose. And now, as I walked alongside Finn, I realized that the rebirth I had experienced was not just strategic, it was deeply personal. I was emerging not only intact but profoundly aligned with my values, desires, and sense of self. Evening shadows stretched long across the pavement, but I felt no apprehension. The city's hum was no longer oppressive, it was energizing. Every footstep echoed a sense of certainty, a recognition that I was fully awake, fully present, and fully capable of steering the course of my own life. Finn's presence beside me was not a tether but a mirror, reflecting a life guided by principle, courage, and mutual respect. Ethan's collapse in public perception had begun to stabilize into something inevitable, a lesson in the consequences of duplicity, a confirmation that integrity could not be faked, and a testament to the power of deliberate, strategic truth. I observed this not with malice, but with understanding. It was a natural consequence, one I had facilitated through clarity and action rather than impulsive emotion. As night deepened, Finn and I paused on a quiet bridge overlooking the water. The river shimmered beneath us, a reflection of the life I had reclaimed, the truth I had asserted, and the integrity that now guided every decision. And for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge something deeper, that I could feel, trust, and desire without compromise, that love could be grounded in alignment, ethics, and mutual respect, that my rebirth was complete not only in action, but in heart. I let the night air fill my lungs, the city lights reflecting not just externally, but within me. The storm of betrayal had ended. The arrest had passed. The humiliation had been integrated and transformed into strength. And in the calm of that moment, walking with Finn, I understood that the life I was building was real, grounded, and profoundly honest, a life where love, integrity, and purpose could coexist, and where the woman I had become was finally free to thrive. The city moved around me in a constant, unpredictable rhythm, but inside, everything felt remarkably steady. There was a calm in the center of the storm that I hadn't known I could feel, a quiet sense of control, clarity, and purpose. Finn had become more than a strategic ally. He had become a partner in every sense that mattered. Not just in planning and execution, but in moral alignment, in shared vision, and now, subtly, in the quiet recognition of mutual attraction. Ethan's world was unraveling. The carefully constructed facade of competence, charm, and ethical alignment was cracking under the weight of truth we had revealed. Every corporate ally who had once deferred to his charisma now hesitated, questioned, or withdrew. Rumors, subtle at first, began to ripple outward. Evidence-backed reports, corroborated accounts of manipulation, and public awareness of his reliance on my activist profile to project a progressive image. He was losing control, not because I wanted revenge, but because reality refused to bend to duplicity. I watched it happen from a place of calm detachment. There was no gloating, no vindictive pleasure. Instead, there was clarity. Justice was not something to chase. It was something to reveal, carefully, deliberately, with precision. And the revelation was far more satisfying than any impulsive act of retaliation could have been. Finn stayed by my side through it all, his presence steady, unobtrusive, yet profoundly grounding. It was in the small things, his quiet assessments, the subtle reassurance in his gaze, the confidence that came from unshakable ethics. We no longer just coordinated strategies. We shared thoughts, values, and even laughter that felt unburdened and natural. With him, I realized that connection could exist without compromise, intimacy without manipulation, and trust without fear. One evening, as we walked along a quieter stretch of the river, the city lights shimmering on the water, I noticed the subtle warmth of his hand brushing against mine. It wasn't forced or rushed, but it carried the weight of presence, intention, and quiet desire. I realized that I had learned to navigate attraction differently now. Desire no longer meant vulnerability to manipulation. It meant choice, awareness, and alignment. The strategic dismantling of Ethan's corporate image continued. Press releases and interviews, carefully crafted and timed, painted a portrait of ethical discrepancy that could not be ignored. The merger he had relied on to cement his image began to falter. Key stakeholders reconsidered, and the company's board began to question the integrity of the man they had backed. It was a slow unraveling, deliberate and precise, but every ripple reinforced the lesson I had learned. Power is fleeting when it is built on lies, but integrity endures. Meanwhile, Finn and I continued to build something entirely our own. Conversations about ethics and strategy shifted seamlessly into discussions about life, vision, and shared priorities. There was an intimacy developing that was entirely grounded in authenticity. I felt seen, respected, and challenged in ways that were energizing rather than constraining. The trust between us was not something to earn. It was mutual, constant, and profoundly reassuring. One night, after reviewing another set of public statements, we lingered on the riverbank. The city hummed around us, distant yet vibrant, and the weight of recent months, the betrayal, the arrest, the public exposure, felt fully integrated into my sense of self. I realized in that quiet moment that rebirth is not a singular event. It is a series of choices, revelations, and alignments that collectively shape the person you become. Finn turned slightly, his eyes reflecting the city lights, and for a moment, there was a pause between us, a pause heavy with unspoken understanding. I felt a thrill, not of recklessness or desperation, but of conscious recognition. Connection could exist here, fully, ethically, and without compromise. I leaned in, almost imperceptibly, and felt his warmth respond. The gesture was slow, deliberate, and entirely mutual, a quiet acknowledgement of trust and desire that didn't demand surrender, but invited intimacy. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment, not rooted in triumph over someone else, but in alignment with my own principles and the presence of someone who matched them. The storm, the humiliation, the betrayal, all of it had been transformative, and now, alongside Finn, I could step into a life that was both ethically grounded and emotionally rich. The river reflected the city's glow, and in that reflection, I saw not just the woman I had survived as, but the woman I had become, deliberate, aware, and fully capable of both love and autonomy. Finn's hand, warm against mine, was the quiet confirmation that honesty, alignment, and shared integrity could guide not only strategy, but the deepest forms of connection. And for the first time, I understood fully that this love, partnership, and moral clarity was what rebirth truly felt like. The city never slept, yet somehow I had learned to find quiet within it. The hum of traffic, the distant murmur of conversation, even the flashing lights of advertising billboards, all of it had become a backdrop rather than a distraction. I moved through my days with purpose, each step deliberate, each choice reflective of the woman I had become. Harper, the activist, the strategist, the survivor, was no longer a title she wore for anyone else. It was a truth I carried, fully and unflinchingly. Finn had become more than an ally. He was a companion in clarity, a mirror of integrity, and, increasingly, a presence that made the idea of connection feel safe. There was no haste, no pressure, only a quiet alignment that resonated with everything I had been learning about myself. Desire, I realized, did not need to compromise ethics or autonomy. Connection could be grounded in shared values, and love could exist alongside independence. Ethan's empire, built on manipulation and image, was collapsing with a slow, inevitable precision. Stakeholders questioned his decisions, colleagues distanced themselves, and the merger that had been his ultimate triumph faltered under the weight of exposure. I watched it from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with calm observation. The storm of deceit had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. The lesson was evident. Authenticity is more enduring than artifice. One evening, Finn and I found ourselves walking along the river, the water reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns that felt almost symbolic. There was a rhythm in our steps, a quiet conversation that didn't require words. We had spent countless hours planning, analyzing, and strategizing, but now the dialogue shifted to reflection, our past experiences, our shared principles, and the possibility of a future unburdened by the manipulations of others. I noticed, with a subtle thrill, the way he matched my pace, his hand brushing against mine as though by accident, yet perfectly timed. There was no urgency, only an acknowledgement of presence, of trust, and of mutual understanding. I realized then that I could desire without fear, that intimacy could be chosen rather than coerced, and that love could be both thrilling and grounding simultaneously. As the night deepened, We paused on a small bridge, the city glowing quietly behind us. Finn turned slightly, eyes reflecting both warmth and respect, and I felt the current between us shift, subtle but undeniable. I leaned in, feeling the alignment of trust and intention, and our first kiss was gentle, deliberate, and entirely mutual. It was not a surrender, but a shared acknowledgement, a recognition that connection could exist without compromise and that desire could be fully integrated with awareness. For the first time since the arrest, since the betrayal, since the public humiliation, I felt a sense of completion. Not closure in the sense of revenge, but completion in the sense of rebirth. I had survived, I had reclaimed my narrative, and I had discovered that ethical alignment and emotional fulfillment could coexist. Finn's steady presence was a confirmation that the path I had chosen, the honest one, was not only viable but profoundly rewarding. Ethan was a fading shadow, his manipulations rendered meaningless by truth and transparency. And I, Harper, was no longer the girl used for optics or ambition. I was a woman reborn, capable of love, of ethical action, and of navigating life with clarity and confidence. The storm had ended, and in its place was a quiet exhilaration, the freedom to choose, to connect, and to build a life aligned with principle. I rested my hand against Finn's, the warmth grounding and thrilling all at once, and realized that this delicate balance of autonomy, trust, and desire was what rebirth truly felt like. The future was no longer uncertain. It was ours to navigate, honestly, fully, and together. The morning light felt different now, warmer, steadier, almost deliberate, as if the city itself recognized that something in me had shifted permanently. I walked along familiar streets with a sense of quiet power, each step a confirmation of my agency, my clarity, and the life I had reclaimed. Months ago, I had been arrested, publicly humiliated, and betrayed by someone I thought I could trust. Today, I was free not just in body but in spirit. Ethan's presence had faded from my life, both figuratively and literally. The merger he had relied on for prestige collapsed, leaving his carefully curated image in shambles. I didn't revel in it. There was no satisfaction in seeing him falter. The lesson had never been about him. It had been about me, about survival, clarity, integrity, and the power of deliberate action. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving only the steady, unshakable foundation of who I truly was. Finn walked beside me, a quiet constant in the flow of my newly ordered world. The bond we had built was something rare, rooted in shared principles, trust, and mutual respect. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. The intimacy between us was grounded, real, and entirely honest. I realized that love, when built on alignment and integrity, didn't demand compromise. It invited growth, trust, and the freedom to thrive together while remaining fully oneself. We paused near the river, the water reflecting the sunlight in 1,000 fractured sparks that reminded me of the moments that had led me here, each one sharp, necessary, and transformative. Finn's gaze met mine, steady and unflinching, and I felt the weight of months of strategy, betrayal, and survival settle into a sense of completion. "This is different," I admitted softly, my voice barely above the murmur of the water. "I feel whole, not just because of what we've done, but because of who I've become." Finn reached for my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine effortlessly. "You've always been whole, Harper. You just needed to see it yourself." I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep within, unburdened by fear, shame, or manipulation. The air between us was quiet, intimate, and alive with possibility. I realized that this was what rebirth felt like, not a single moment, but a series of choices, actions, and revelations that aligned both heart and mind. We leaned against the railing, looking out over the river, and I let myself savor the quiet triumph. The arrest, the public humiliation, the betrayal, they had all been necessary fires. They had stripped away illusions, clarified priorities, and revealed the path that truly mattered. And now, with Finn beside me, The path felt brighter, steadier, and entirely mine to walk. He turned to me, his expression tender, his gaze unwavering. I felt the warmth of his presence, a connection rooted in honesty and trust, and in that instant, I knew exactly what I wanted. I leaned in slightly, testing the space between us, and he closed the distance without hesitation. Our lips met in a kiss that was gentle but deliberate, full of meaning and grounded in everything we had endured and built together. It was not a kiss of passion without purpose. It was a kiss of alignment, of trust, of rebirth. In that moment, I felt the culmination of everything: the survival, the clarity, the strategy, the empowerment, and the discovery that love could exist without compromise, grounded entirely in shared integrity. The river reflected the city's light in glittering, fractured patterns, and I let myself melt into the moment. I was Harper, reborn, whole, unshakable, and finally free to live, love, and thrive on my own terms. And as Finn's hands held mine and the kiss lingered, I understood fully that this, the alignment of heart, mind, and purpose, was the true definition of happily ever after.